God is in the mercy business, the retrieval business, the bailing us out business. God is in the bringing us back from the brink of disaster business. Jesus says we don't get to say who gets mercy and who doesn't. That's God's thing. We don't get to set limits on God's grace. If anything, we are agents and magnifiers and multipliers of grace, but we can't be limiters or reducers of grace. If we're reducing or limiting grace, then we're actually not in the grace business. We're in the offering judgment business. And those are two very different business models. When you look at Christ on the cross, we can absolutely say that God is entirely self-giving. And that self-giving is never bounded or restricted to any one person or group. And that's hard. That's hard because I like my group. And I happen to think my group is probably right most of the time. Or at any rate, my group is the best. I have the best group. God knows this about us. And therefore, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like people straggling into a work site all day. They put in a few hours, and they get paid the same as the ones that have been working all day. That's great for you if you're one of the latecomers, but what about those of us who got up early and have been there all day? The problem is that by 5 o'clock, what the gospel refers to as the usual daily wage, that starts to look like pretty thin remuneration. When I've been breaking rocks for 11 hours with my 10-minute lunch, and you've only been here for, say, a half hour. Because if you've earned the usual daily wage, well, I can just start to do the math and salivate. Doesn't matter what we settled on in the first place. I have now obviously qualified for a huge bonus today, right? I'm special now, somehow. So imagine my shock when I get my check. Deductions and withholding, and oh no, this hourly wage is the same as everybody else. And I want to go to my employer and take my stub and say, look, you can't run a business on this. If you keep this up, you're going to be broke within a week. Because everyone who comes in here looking for work can't be a charity case. And besides, what makes you think you can keep the good workers on your rolls when you're throwing money at anyone who holds a shovel for a second? That's bad for business. And the boss man stares us down, and he returns us to the main point. He says, here's the bottom line. He says to those self-righteous workers, I get to do what I want with what I have. And what I want to do is to be generous. So there. He says, it doesn't matter if we don't understand. How could we understand? Besides, he says, and maybe this is the very bottom line, he says, are you envious because I am generous? Well, he got me there. Does God get you there ever? Are you jealous because I am generous? He says. Are you feeling bad just because I want other people to feel good? Are you mad about what I'm giving you, even though it's precisely what we agreed on? Did you see what the others got and then assume you were going to get even more? Because that's not what we talked about. That's not the agreement we made. So why this sudden burst of negativity? That seems to be Jesus' logic as I trace it through this parable. And even more, he says, that kind of thinking is just not the economy of heaven. Grace and merit don't seem to have anything to do with each other in that economy. In fact, that's the point of grace, isn't it? That we received from God specifically what we did not earn. Or as Shakespeare proposed, the quality of mercy is not strained. Grace is grace is grace. Mercy is mercy is mercy. It can't be contained. You don't give a little to one and a lot to another. You don't grade it or rank it. Instead, it just is whatever it is. You just give it and you receive it. And it's all from God. So back to the question. Am I jealous because I didn't get the most special blessing, but instead I just got a normal, amazing blessing like everyone else? Am I jealous because God's mercy blesses everyone and not just me? Am I jealous because God's mercy is equal and fair, even if it's fair in a way that I can't comprehend? Am I jealous? Of course I'm jealous. You bet I am. It's not a sage answer, but it's honest. Jesus, I want that extra blessing. I don't want that extra generosity, please, to fall precisely right here on me, and on mine, my country, my company, my family, my kids, my spouse, my ideas, my church. That's where the blessing needs to go. But mostly, generally, just me. Me and whatever is in my general vicinity. Because I guess deep down there is a part of me that thinks, and you really hate to say it, but that thinks that somehow I'm just more special. Or that somehow I deserve it more than you. And Jesus says to me, pretty generously, I think, grow up. That's not what this is about. That's not what any of this is about. All people deserve grace, mercy, and love. I'm descended from South Kansas people who proudly say that the reward for hard work is more hard work. That work is its own virtue, and what else is there to say about it? Somehow, we're not supposed to be fixated on the reward part, or whether the reward part is fair. I come from a people who say that if you're cold, put on a sweater. If you're tired, go to bed. If you're limping around on a sprained ankle, walk it off. If you're hungry, eat a banana, but don't complain about being hungry. And don't eat too much right now or you'll spoil your supper later. And don't even think about whining, because no one ever said that life is fair and you're no more special than any other Tom, Dick, or Harry. Did any of you hear that when you were growing up? That's what they said. That's what they told us. And we might have even agreed to it publicly with a stiff upper lip. But now what did we do? We waited until the authority figures had gone around the corner and we carped about it anyway. We kicked the dust and shook our heads in anger and we said, I know fairness when I see it, and this ain't fair. Fairness is an honest day's wage for an honest day's work. You don't work, you don't eat. That was our honest response. Flawed, but honest. My friends, how to square our flawed humanity in the face of divine grace and in the knowledge of a God who treats everyone equally and who expects us to do the same if we would be his followers. I look, as I so often do when I come upon the horns of an ethical dilemma like this, upon my mom. She was the same woman, yes, who told me to put on a sweater when I was cold. She's always been a person of amazingly deep faith in God. Her entire adult life and much of her childhood was spent marinating in the scriptures. And anytime she would have a quandary in her life, she would ask herself, what does the Bible teach about this? What does God say through the Bible? She has been a humbling and inspiring personal example. But I was the kind of kid who was often quite judgmental. And in those years, she would fix me with a certain stare when I was being judgmental, and she would say, "Who are you to judge?" Sometimes she would add, "Do you know what people are going through?" At first, I took that as chastisement, and it was a necessary chastisement. Later, as an adult, I came to appreciate it differently, as liberation, as freedom, as an invitation of sorts, because she knows what it means to dwell in Christ. And she knows it's a calling to be set free from something that is dragging us down in our spirits. She knows what it's like to be freed from the trap of needing to always impose my framework onto everyone. Freed from the burden and weight of thinking that I know better than everybody else. Free and liberated with the chance to simply look all people in the eye and try to take them as they come. That's one thing for me to tell you, but if you've met my mom, you might know. She always said, and I think she had a pretty good source on this, don't judge others lest you be judged. What it took me a while to understand was that for her, those aren't just words. That's a way of life. That's how Jesus walked every day. Not that I'm any good at it, but I'm aware that when I can withhold judgment with God's help, I feel a little lighter and the conversations go easier. I'm aware of God's guiding presence and spirit. I'm aware of the values of Christ being expressed. And yes, that is a kind of freedom. So the master of the vineyard isn't just chastising those slaves today. He's giving them the opportunity to get in on the act of letting go of old accounts and grudges and judgments. To get in on how good it feels to love people as they are and take them as they come. To get in on spreading love and mercy and grace. To walk a little lighter, be freed. When I was a kid, I drove to my grandma's house. My mom would sometimes call Grandma first and say, "We might be a little late." And Grandma would say, "Take your time, be safe. Doesn't matter when you get here. I'll just be thrilled to see you when you come." And that's my prayer for all of us today, that we might find a place within ourselves where we can all say to one another, "It doesn't matter what time you arrived. We're just glad you made it." In Christ's name.